Hello, my name is Mrs. McQueen. I'm the art teacher at Adams Elementary, and today we are going to talk about texture. So, texture is actually one of my favorite elements of art. I'm pretty excited to share this with you today. So, here we are, texture. Texture is one of the elements of art. There are 7 elements of art: line, shape, form, texture, value, color, and space. And you guys probably already know a few things about texture, more than you might think you might know. So just based on this texture, do you know what this is? If you guessed a dog, you would be correct. Your brain identifies the texture with an animal or the fur. It's because art is a visual language. It's not a language with words and letters, but of pictures. So just using this picture, your brain's thinking, wait, I've seen that before. I know what it is. And texture is something that we can use to identify it. So what texture is this? If you guessed a tree, you are correct. And what about this texture? Yeah, this is a strawberry. And this scaly texture? A snake. And this texture looks like a rug or some kind of a woven surface. And that is a very spiky texture. So texture is the way that something feels. An artist used 2 different types of textures. And these are the 2 that we're going to learn about today. The first texture that we're going to learn about is actual texture. Actual texture is texture that you can actually feel with your hands. If I touch it, I can actually feel what it would feel like. This artwork is called Luncheon in Fur. It is by Meret Oppenheim. And the story goes that one day she was having tea with Pablo Picasso and his girlfriend. And she said, Pablo, anything can be art. And Pablo said, well, yeah. And she said, if I take this cup and I cover it in fur, it is art. And Pablo said, you should try it. And so she did, and it was a hit. People loved it. Here's why. It's the texture. The texture kind of plays a trick with our brain. We look at it and we might kind of giggle. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's fun. But have you ever had a hair in your mouth? Ugh, it's gross. You know, you're like, ugh, trying to get that hair off of your tongue. Ugh. The idea of putting fur in your mouth is not really a fun one. So by using texture, this artist had us thinking in a funny way. So this is an example of actual texture. I could actually feel that fur. The next type of art that we're going to talk about is visual or implied texture. Implied texture is texture your eyes can see. This is a portrait. This is Fanny. It is by Chuck Close. And look at that texture. I mean, you can tell that she's older, like all of those age lines. But here's the cool thing about this. This was made out of fingerprints. He did this entirely out of fingerprints. I can see the wrinkles. I can see the fabric of her shirt. The hairy curliness in her hair. However, if I were to actually touch that paper or the canvas, it would be flat. But my eyes are seeing the texture. And to check it out, like, it's huge. Look at the scale. So there's Chuck Close, and there he is using his fingerprints to make that picture. It's amazing. And there's a close-up of it. And you can see the fingerprints that he used to create the texture. That is implied texture or visual texture. Our eyes are seeing the texture, but our hands are not. So just to recap, there are 2 types of textures that artists used: actual texture and implied texture. Actual texture is texture that you can touch with your hands, and implied texture or visual texture is texture that your eyes can see. So here's a question. What if an artist wants to use both types of textures? Can they do it? What do you think? Yes, yes, they can. In fact, you know of one where an artist has used both types of textures. The Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. Now, we would never touch this. This is worth millions and millions of dollars, and we would never touch something that's actually in an art gallery. But if you could touch this, you could feel the texture of the paint. He applied the paint so thick. Here's a close-up of it, that you would be able to feel the thickness of the paint. That would be our actual texture that we could actually feel. However, our eyes are also seeing the swirliness of the sky, the bumpiness of the mountain and the fields. You can this is the cypress tree, and you can see like the natural texture of the cypress tree and all the natural textures here. He uses the straight lines for the houses and the church to kind of imply like wood or like a flat surface. So Vincent van Gogh uses both types of textures here. Here's another close-up of it. I think that is so cool. All right, so let's go over really quick. Can you tell which texture was used? Was it visual, or was it actual or implied texture? Let's do this one. This is by Albert Dürer. He was a German Renaissance artist, and this is his study of a rabbit. Is this something that I can actually touch with my hand, or is this something that my eyes see? So we know that the texture is furry. Is it furry to my hands with actual texture, or is it furry to my eyes with visual or implied texture? If you said it was furry for my visual or implied texture, you are right. This is an example of implied texture. Let's go to the next one. This is Deborah Butterfield, and this is one of her horses. Now, is this an example of actual texture where I can actually touch it, or is this an example of implied texture where my eyes visually see it? Yeah, if you said visual, or I'm sorry, if you said actual, you were right. If I took my hand, and again, it's artwork, so I would never want to touch it, but if I did, and I could go over and pet this horse, I would feel the roughness of the texture that she used. So this is an example of actual texture. All right, what about this one? This is by Jan van Eyck. This is called The Wedding Portrait. This is a very cool painting. There's all kinds of secrets and symbolism in this painting. But let's just talk about the texture. My favorite part of the texture is Fifi, this little dog down here. Look at this little guy. Oh, he's got great texture. Is it actual texture that I can actually touch? Or is it visual texture or implied texture that I can see? That's right. It is visual texture or implied texture. It is texture that I can see. If I were to try to pet this dog, I would only feel the canvas. But my eyes can see that the dog is furry. Whoa, what about this guy? Yeah, this is actual texture. I could go up and actually touch those furry eyebrows or his skin. Again, would never do it. But this is actual texture. Okay, I think this is our last one. This is Robert Rauschenberg, and this is a combine. It's where you combine a bunch of things. And is this an example of actual texture or implied texture or visual texture? Could you actually go up and touch that, or could you only see it with your eyes? Yeah, you could actually go up and touch it. So this would be an example of actual texture. All right, one last thing. Which artwork does not use any texture? Let's take a look. So we have a still life right here, and then we have a seascape right here with a large barge or a cargo ship or something. And If you think that this one shows texture, you are correct. Look at the texture in the lace of that tablecloth, even the bread, the smoothness of that. It looks like a tea, not a teacup, but a pouring thing. Even the texture, look at that. Looks like some kind of a stew pie. Lots and lots of great textures there. Look at that lemon. Oh, beautiful textures. But here, notice, whoops, there are no textures. No grassy textures on the hill. Even the trees, how do they do it? They just use shapes. So if you don't have any textures, and look at the water, do you see how it's just a flat shape? So this would be how an artist would not use any texture at all. What do you think is more interesting? I think they're both really great, but texture definitely is a way to make your artwork look a lot more impressive. So this week, boys and girls, you are going to be learning on how to use textures and create textures, and then applying that texture to your artwork. Please reach out to your teacher if you have any questions, and good luck.